Next speaker is Kathleen Stock, who is a philosophy lecturer from the University of Sussex.
Hello. Right, thank you for having me. So I'm an academic at the University of Sussex, and I'm in the philosophy department. Yeah, I know. And one of the areas in philosophy that is pretty standard for the discipline is social and political philosophy. We argue about the rights and wrongs of laws and social and political arrangements. We have opinions, but we try and back those opinions up with reasoned arguments. It's pretty standard. It's what we try to do. In the last few months, I have decided to do some public philosophy of a kind, and I've started writing about problems that I think exist with the Gender Recognition Act and about the interaction with the Equalities Act. And I've posted a series of essays on the open platform Medium, which you can search for by looking for my name and Medium, or they're all pinned on my Twitter feed. So in my writing, I'm clear, personally, that I completely support the rights of trans people to live their lives without violence, harm, or discrimination. And I mean it. And I'm also keen to distinguish personally between trans activists and trans people. As far as I'm concerned, trans activists, the people I have in mind, are the organisations that are rich, well-connected, powerful, politically well-connected, and they have a very simplified core political message. The message is trans women are women that we've heard. It's a mantra that applies in all possible contexts, apparently, and they promote self-ID. And it is important to note that not all trans people agree with these organisations. Trans people are a very diverse group, as is every group of human beings. So it's quite strange to see them presented as a kind of monolithic group all the time. Okay, so one focus in my writing is on possible conflicts of interest between two groups. On the one hand, biological females, and on the other hand, self-identifying trans women. Now, conflicts of interest between groups happen as a standard feature of political life. You might find them between religious groups and secular groups, and philosophers talk about them all the time. What happens is, in a conflict of interest, if you give one group something, you take away something important from the other. And I believe that there are some important conflicts of interest here. Trans activists would have you believe that there is absolutely no conflicts of interest here whatsoever. There are no consequences for biological females if we go along with the ideology that they promote, and I disagree. So I think that there are some permissions, protections, resources that if we give them to self-identifying trans women, we will take something away from biological women, and even worse, it will be taking away something that's already in short supply because of a sexist society. So, take, for instance, female safety from sexual violence, which is already in short supply, as we already know. If same-sex spaces for females, where they undress or where they sleep, are removed or reduced, as is starting to happen across the UK anyway, then this potentially reduces the safety of females from sexual violence, which was already in short supply. Take political representation for females, which is already in short supply because we live in a sexist society. If we then give some of that political representation to trans women via all-women shortlists that were originally designed to mitigate against sexism, then this reduces the already limited opportunities for political representation for females. So you can make that sort of point with respect to female sport, media representation. There's a range of areas you could argue that. So, if trans women are literally women, not just legally, but in every possible context, then, and even more so if self-identifying trans women are literally women in every possible context, then that does nothing less than force society into a complete re-understanding of what it is to be a woman. And obviously that has an impact on the biological females who were already occupying that category. So it's perfectly okay for us to talk about that, because it has an impact on our lives. So that's the sort of thing I'm writing about, but what I actually want to focus on more for my remaining time is the reception that my writing has had in academia, because I think I want to describe a problem which partly explains why the things I've just described are not getting properly discussed. And that's the relative silence of academics in universities who wish they're there and they wish to be critical of these narratives that are put forward by trans activists, but they are self-silencing or silenced. And to give you a sense of how the silencing happens, I'll tell you briefly about some of the responses that I've had to the stuff that I've been writing, and I started 10 weeks ago. So these responses have taken a couple of forms. One is aggressive, angry public responses from fellow academics. For instance, saying, I'm causing harm and even violence to trans people by my writing. Despite the fact that I constantly reaffirm that I think that trans people should be free from violence and harm, but I'm causing it directly. I'm told that I'm trying to whip up a moral panic about trans women, despite my repeatedly saying that I am not saying they're a particularly dangerous group. I'm saying they are biologically male, and there are patterns of male violence that we know exist. I'm told that I'm debating the existence of trans people. I'm not debating that. I know they exist. I'm talking about the law, and that's different. I'm criticized all the time for not being kind or inclusive. Despite the fact those are obviously gendered stereotypes, I'm supposed to care that I'm not kind because I'm a woman. No one tries that shit on men. So, and I'm told I'm playing intellectual games with people's lives. This is not a fun game for me. I'm doing this because I think it matters. I'm not a psychopath. Right, so. Okay. So what I want to point out is that those are not standard criticisms for academia. Normally you engage with arguments. You don't talk about character or motivations. You don't try and say that somebody's evil or, all that. Plus, there have been public protests about me on campus, at the student union. There's been stuff in the Argus about me, so it's all coming down. And the aim is to make me feel ashamed, as far as I can see. And also to socially isolate me from potential supporters so that they don't get dragged into this media frenzy, whatever. And the ultimate aim is to get me to stop talking. So generalizing from my own case, social shaming seems to me the way that operates in this debate. You're told you're evil, you're told you're confused, you don't know enough, you're not kind, you're causing harm, and that's meant to get us to shut up. And it's particularly aimed at females because we are susceptible, allegedly, to this feeling of shame. So people will use this more disproportionately on females than males. But in my case, it hasn't worked. I feel no shame whatsoever in anything I have written. I believe what I've done is important, and even if I'm wrong, I'm absolutely convinced I should have the right to say it without being personally attacked. So, what I want to ask is, what are the material consequences of this sort of environment for academics? Well, one is that academics only feel comfortable talking privately or at most anonymously. So I don't know of any other area where there are academics actually using pseudonyms because they can't be identified. And I've lost count of the emails I've had from sympathetic academics since I started this, but they all say, my job's too precarious, I don't know what, I can't face the onslaught that comes at me. So because most people are not speaking out, I now want to finish by listing some areas, academic areas, where I think we need analysis, observation, discussion, free discussion without this kind of fear that's animating the whole discussion. So first up, law. From legal scholars, we need, among other things, some public discussion of the ambiguous interaction between the Equalities Act and the Gender Recognition Act, because there are some real ambiguities there. I've talked to barristers and lawyers who say we don't know how to interpret these interactions. But more basically, we need public clarification of the fact that law cannot change biology. As Helen has said, you can legally change your sex with a gender recognition certificate, but that was never intended by lawmakers to make any pronouncement on biology. It wasn't even meant to pronounce on the nature of womanhood. It was a sort of legal fiction, the technical term is legal fiction, intended by law that trans women be treated as their preferred gender for certain defined legal purposes. And that's different to this mantra, trans women are women, in all possible contexts. The law had nothing to say about most of those contexts, and that needs to be clarified. Next, the academic area of medicine and biology. So some people on the internet, I don't know how much you should believe people on the internet, but some people believe, apparently, that trans women can be biologically female because they take hormones. And that's not true. And it doesn't matter how much Judith Butler you read, that just is not going to become true. There are complications with people who are born intersex, but they are of no relevance to a biological male who starts taking hormones late post-pubescent. So if academics don't start saying that more loudly, the people in the public will get more and more confused. And we will lose a powerful explanation of the sex-based oppression of females if we can't talk about females. If we can't talk about female health and reproduction, then we're lost. And I saw something on social media the other day that said trans women could get periods, and 1,000 people had liked it. Well, obviously they can't, but people are confused. Next up, history. So, trans activists are prone to revising historical narratives to make transgender people central to them, despite the fact that the public concept only emerged in the 1990s. This year, for instance, I must have seen hundreds of times the claim that the Stonewall riot was started by Marsha P. Johnson, a trans woman, in 1969 in New York. And the Stonewall riot was instrumental in catalyzing activism around gay rights. This claim about Marsha Johnson is factually inaccurate in two ways. By her own admission, she got there after the riot had started. It was started by a butch lesbian, who no one ever knows about. And I can't pronounce it properly, but Stormé de Larry. And equally importantly, Marsha referred to herself as a drag queen and a gay man. So it's anachronistic to describe Marsha as a trans woman, and yet that is being used ideologically by Stonewall to motivate a whole lot of stuff. How long have I got?
I was listening so intently.
Okay, so turning now to psychology. In the discussion of same-sex spaces, statistics about trans women's lives are often used as a catalyst to politically motivate the idea that trans women must have access to female-only spaces because they are very vulnerable. So we get statistics about rates of violence against trans people, hate crime, attempts at suicide, and so on. Now, most of those statistics, as far as I can see, come from phone polls or internet surveys commissioned by organisations like Stonewall. The results are then interpreted in press releases by Stonewall, and the press releases are then just used uncritically to inform media reporting, and even by members of the government in deciding policy. So I would like to see some proper academic scrutiny of these statistics, and ideally some academic studies that are not paid for by charities with a vested interest, just in the same way that risk of bias is discussed openly with respect to trials of drugs when they're funded by pharmaceutical companies. We want to know where did the stats come from, who paid for them, and we ideally would want someone neutral to be doing the studies. Okay, so I'll finish with my own area, philosophy. Now, philosophy trades in conceptual distinctions and clarifications, and it would be of enormous help to the public conversation if we could distinguish between the following things. For instance, we could distinguish between a human right and a way of realizing that right. It is not a human right of a trans woman to enter a space set up to protect females. It's a human right of trans women to be free of violence, and this proposed solution to that right is to get them into female-only spaces. But there's plenty of other ways we could realize that right. We don't have to do it by getting them into female-only spaces. So that's one way, one distinction. Philosophy can also help us understand the difference between what's called deliberately misgendering someone in an insulting way and talking about biological and political reality. So there has to be a context in which we can permissibly talk about female bodies, experiences, without it being an insult to somebody listening. If we don't have the language to describe the differences between females and trans women, we can't name our own bodies, we can't name our own oppression. Philosophy can also help us examine what a lesbian is. Can the category of lesbians include a preoperative male trans woman with a penis who exclusively fancies females? Trans activists say yes. Many lesbians, including myself, say no. And that's not because I'm being mean or unkind. It's because we need a category for homosexual orientation between females. It does political and conceptual work, and if we got rid of it, we'd just have to reinvent it because it's still a thing. So, okay, so that's just some of the academic questions that need tackling. And why should academics with expertise talk out about this? I can think of 3 reasons, and I'll finish with those. The first is, rather boringly, facts matter, and should matter to academics above all. The truth matters, and if most of the academics who have expertise in this debate are not talking and are frightened to talk, then we just get a one-sided narrative, and we also get wild, inaccurate, confused claims and theories, and no one's there to correct them. And that's already hurting females, and it will possibly even end up hurting trans people. Many trans people are alarmed about the way the dominant discourse is going because they fear a backlash for them. The second reason academics need to speak up is we need to set an example. Many young people today, not just students, but kids and teens, are online, and they are living in a climate of suffocation. They cannot say what they think. They are terrified of saying the wrong thing, being dogpiled or whatever the word is, onto them. They feel stifled, they feel frightened, and they're even more susceptible to social shaming than adults are. So herding and groupthink is developing online, and if academics don't try and show the world what a measured, balanced, sane discussion looks like, and how we can deal with disagreement. Like, it's okay to disagree, we just don't have to go apeshit about it. Then we're failing those young people. And the final reason academics need to speak out is this climate of fear is allowing fascistic tendencies to develop in society. The reception of a woman's place so far, the harassment of venues and ticket sellers, the bomb threats, the threats on social media, the sometimes violent protests, my email was hacked today, should not be happening in a free and democratic society. Females coming together to discuss the law and how it affects them are being frightened off. And academics are supposed to be a key part of civil society in a supposedly democratic country, and quite frankly, they need to woman up.